5 Assessment and Reporting Webinar Series. For the discussion today, the topic will be on design, selection, organization, and utilization of assessment strategies. Before we begin, take note of the following reminders. Make sure you are registered to the webinar to have your e-certificate of participation. Visit certificate.vibalgroup.com to generate your proof of attendance. Place your questions on the comment box allotted during the session and they will be addressed by our speaker later on. Share the video using hashtag LearnAs1PH as our official hashtag to our VIBAL webinars. Experience learning, ka-VIBAL? And now, to proceed with our webinar this afternoon, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our distinguished speaker today. He is a consultant and evaluator for K-12 Philippine Basic Education, the curriculum and academic consultant of Sisters of Mary. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Brother Roderick M. Aguirre.
A pleasant and wonderful afternoon to everyone and all teachers and parents tuning in today this afternoon. I believe that yesterday and the other day we went through really bad times because of the typhoon Ulysses. But God has a way of making us understand that these things do happen, not just to bad people, but also to all types of people, not just to teach us something, but one or the other to cleanse our environment with imbalance. And this is a natural way of, it's like sweating. It cools off and it tries to cool off temperature and the imbalance in our environment. And let us not see this as something bad, but let's see this something that we need to adjust to. All right, because a lot of people say this is bad thing, that these bad things are happening to us because we've been doing bad things. So these are natural calamities, okay? They are not divine. So when natural calamities naturally and miraculously dissolve before it enters and touch down on a land, then that would say divine intervention. But these are natural happenings in our environment. We need to adjust to it and not the other way around. Okay, so this afternoon we're now starting with PPST Domain 5. And this previous weeks until this week, until next week, we will be devoting a lot of webinars, and the topics of which would be focusing more on helping our teachers cope with the demands of the trainings on PPST. And I hope that keep on tuning in. And if you're not able to register, you still have until 6 p.m. tonight to register so that you can have a valid certificate that you can show to your administrators and something that you can beef up your portfolio. Okay, I'm happy with my background. It's kind of new to me though, but there's a new thing here in VIBAL right now. We're supposed to have a more scholarly and a more bookworm type of atmosphere, and I'm feeling it right now. Okay, so before I begin and start talking a lot, I'm only given limited time to share my ideas and my thoughts. But these are not my ideas and thoughts; these are standards, and these are principles as principles that all teachers and all educators and all administrators should know. And these are basic information that we should know about assessment and reporting. Okay, let me share my PowerPoint presentation with you. There we go. Okay, so PPST 5 and Domain 1, that will be design, selection, organization, utilization of assessment strategies. That will be myself. That will be me. And November 13, 2020, that's on a Friday. Big GIF, thank God it's Friday. But again, we should celebrate life and should not, mulk over about, the things that happen to us. Okay, let's count our blessings. Okay, so I would like you to look at the last two words in the title of my PowerPoint presentation. It says assessment strategies. Okay, it does not necessarily mean assessment tools, assessment protocols. These we would like the teachers and administrators and parents to see assessment as part and parcels of instruction. The teaching and learning process evolves around the two facets of assessment and instruction. Assessment will be our base also to improve our instruction, and also be a feedback to what kind of instruction and the quality of instruction we provide for our students. Also, it would also be by the assessment, we will also be guided as to whether our students are now motivated to learn even more and their progress in learning. And so assessment in its totality is multifaceted and multidimensional, and that's what we're going to discuss to this afternoon. So to share with you our flow over discussion for this afternoon, so our agenda for this afternoon is, I'll call it agenda, something like we're just having a conversation and all, like having a meeting, but it's more of a conversation and discussion together, sort of, exchange ideas. So on that note, if you have questions and clarifications that you would like to ask me, do not hesitate to key in your questions and comments at the comments box below, and I will entertain them at the end of my presentation. Promise. All right, so I'll begin with, of course, scenario and assessment and evaluation. These are some common scenarios in our schools pertaining to assessment and evaluation. It's kind of funny, but these are reality. I know that sometimes we will laugh over these situations, but we need to these situations do happen, and we have to do something about that. It's my systems, a low system resource can affect your audio quality, closing some of. Um, I'm being requested to switch off my camera because I have a low connectivity right now, because there's still we have still problems of connectivity here in Cavite. But nonetheless, I'll try to continue on. Hanggat hindi natatanggal po, sorry to shift to Philippine, hindi natatanggal ang aking connectivity at nag-static po ako, I'll continue with my camera on, okay? Second, we're going to do a little bit of just a defining assessment and evaluation as far as K to 12. K to 12 program is concerned, and contextualizing assessment and evaluation in the department here in the Philippines, as per Department Order Number 8, Series of 2015, Department Order Number 21, Series of 2019. I think we all know, all teachers out there should be well versed with all of these type of orders, where the guidelines and the protocols on the K to 12 assessment and evaluation are explicitly mentioned and stipulated. And to proceed to purpose and assessment and evaluation, let us consider that the see assessment as not as just an end product that is delivered and given to the students, and on that note too, we would like also to change the perspective of our students, of our learners towards assessment. Assessment is something that they should dread about, or something that they should fear. But they should see also, they should accept assessment as something part of the learning process, that by subjecting themselves in various assessment procedures, they get to know where they are and how they are doing with how they're doing as far as their learning progress is concerned. And that's how we're supposed to see assessment, and that's how we're supposed to orient our students and our teachers and our administrators on implementing any assessment and evaluation protocol in our schools. Then I'll proceed to selecting. I'll be suggesting strategies, okay, strategies on selecting, organizing, and utilizing. But I would like to apologize in advance that I will not be able to delve into specificities of all of these strategies, because I'm delivering this in a more broader perspective as more of a information for all of us. But don't worry, if you comment that you need strategies, a more specific strategy on art of questioning, on formulating questions, on creating table of specifications, on creating test questions, we will have a specific trainings and webinars on that later on. But at the moment, we're just going to focus more on selecting and organizing, designing, selecting, organizing, utilizing various assessment strategies. Okay, and then we go on to, well, pagkasamahin na po natin yan. And then we will have conclusions and challenges that I'll present to you. Before that, we'll have an open forum. So let's strike on and let's begin our conversation, our discussion for this afternoon over coffee. Oh, it's supposed to be a coffee, but it's not seen in my augmented reality background. Okay. So let's look at the following scenario about assessment and evaluation and how we can change that perspective. Okay. So one perspective is this a very hilarious picture about differentiated assessment. It says here, the teacher says, and the students are, the animals represent the students, of course. I mean, you know what I'm trying to say, and what the picture is trying to tell us in allegorically. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree. Kung sino sa kanila sa tingin ninyo ang makakapasa, hindi yung monkey, kawawa naman yung fish and so on. Well, but the picture is trying to tell us is that do we consider that our assessment tools, when we create our assessment tools, they consider the individual abilities of our students, capabilities of our students? And we're not talking only about summative assessment, we're talking about formative assessment. And I'm telling you that assessment should not be seen as separate from instruction. So the examination should also be looked into as a way of helping our students understand the lesson. The questions that we ask during discussion are also forms of assessment. They fall under formative assessment. And the kind of questions and strategies like pictures and visual aids that we provide for our students are also part of what we call as a more holistic idea of assessment. So teaching strategies are not just teaching strategies, there are also assessment strategies. So we have to look at strategies in various perspectives. There are learning strategies for students. They are teaching strategies for teachers, but at the same time, to bridge the gap between what the students are learning and what the teachers are teaching, we call them as learning strategies or also assessment strategies. All right. So on this note, I think we need to consider, teachers need to consider that there are various forms of assessment. And when we have these various forms of assessment, various forms, come on with this team, various form of assessments, we need to consider the different abilities of our students. So group activities as a form of formative assessment, individual activities, drills, practice drills should be seen as an assessment form and should also consider the various different needs of our students. All right, let's look at another scenario. Okay, performance assessment. Okay, Oogie flunks his cave drawing final. Look at Oogie. And then all of them got A. I think one of the things that we need to look into, especially on assessing our students' performance, is that the performance of our students should be based on standards, not based on the personal standards of the teacher. And a lot of things that happened before in our educational system before is that a lot of teachers use their abilities, their capabilities in assessing of our students. And if our students, based on standards that we have set for them, given the performance, have mastered all of it and have been exceeded, why wouldn't we give the child 100% or a perfect score on the performance? This is not based on sasabihin ng ibang teacher, kasi ibig sabihin mas magaling na siya sa akin, ibig sabihin wala na siyang room for improvement. He has room for improvement in other tasks and other skills. But as far as he is concerned, his performance is concerned, and the standards that you have set based on the curriculum guide and the curriculum map that you created, he has mastered and has done his best to meet those standards and even went beyond. And so, teachers' ability in assessing our students should not be limited on what he or she thinks should be what's best or what should be the most creative. It should be based on the standards set by your curriculum. And one way or the other, teachers should also be within those standards. Okay? Kasi nga, pag hindi nag-meet ang criteria ng standards ng inyong performance, and then hindi pala yun ang criteria ng teachers ninyo, doon po nagkakaroon ng problema sa pag-assess. All right? Teachers and students should be the ones to go up to the standards and not the other way around. Iba kasi kino-compromise ang standards. These are these standards that Department of Education has downloaded down to the schools, to the teachers, have went through research that these are some of the 21st century standards that all students and therefore teachers should have acquired, and therefore these are also the standards that teachers should also be teaching the students. But then again, we go back to the cliche that how can teachers teach what they do not have? How can teachers assess their performance on something that they they are not aware of? Yan po ang problema. Itong scenario po natin sa mga performance tests. And I think performance tests have been delegated as a must to the Philippine educational system when K to 12 was introduced to the Philippines way back, perhaps 2010, 2012, 2013, when chaos happened in the Philippines when K to 12 started. But before that, performance and product performance were more of a project, more of additional or a strategy of the teacher that makes the teacher more creative or not. But this time, these are requirements, these are standards, it's a must. All right? So, ito po isa pang scenario nun. So, how to deal with this? Train po natin ang mga teachers. It's what we call as training the mindset of our teachers. Na sasabihin po natin sa mga teachers, meron po tayong rubrics. Ang rubrics ito, ang basihan po natin ng pag-assess sa ating mga estudyante, sa performance ng ating mga estudyante, hindi po ang inyong sarili. Alright? Kung ang bata na-meet yung standards, then kailangan bigyan na po natin karampatang grado. Alright? Another scenario, this is what we call as incidental learning. Okay, this happens po. Incidental learning, a lot of incidental happen. In fact, a lot of philosophers like Edward Thorndike and Garnay, Garnay, Gagne kasi ang pronunciation, pero I heard from some of my American friends that they pronounce Gagne. Kunwari, Amerikano ako, di Gagne pagka-pronounce ko para social, ba? So this is a scenario on incidental learning. And this philosopher that mentioned, they believe that the core of learning centers on incidental learning, and that teachers should address this incidental learnings happening in individual students. Let's have an example. Mrs. Jenkins, why isn't Pluto a planet anymore? This happened. Ito yung cartoon na nilabas ng NASA and the Science Society that Pluto is not a planet but a platinoid. Platinoid? Something like that. Okay? Then the teacher answered, "That's a good question, Jimmy, but it wouldn't be on the standardized test. So I'm afraid we don't have time to discuss that." Next. On this note, kung hindi siya kasama sa standards, okay, ito sinasabi po natin na how do we take care of those questions, of those clarifications of our students? Do we need to address this questions from our students that are outside what we had planned for? This is what we call as formative assessment. That we should encourage this kind of way of thinking from our students, thinking outside the box. And then the teacher, just because it wasn't part of the test, doesn't mean it's not learning. Hindi ibig sabihin dahil hindi siya kasama sa assessment guidelines, hindi siya kasama sa assessment coverage, hindi na siya learning. These are still forms of learning. Kaya tinawag siyang incidental learning. They may not be part of what's stated in the curriculum, but because students are learning, still, it's learning. So we need to teach our teachers that hindi lang academic ang dapat matutunan ng bata, but the idea that they can ask questions. And then by asking questions, they could look for answers on this. Kasi pag ginawa po natin yan, I'm afraid, so sabihin ng bata, so ang mga impormasyon pala na hindi nakalagay sa curriculum at hindi pala test, hindi ko na kailangan tanong, sige, I will stop thinking, especially on those areas. O di parang sinabi sa mga bata, stop being creative, stop metacognition. Let's have another scenario, okay? I have no idea. So, nagpapile up ang mga assessment results. Okay? Sa school, sa mga academic, yung mayroong assessment, mayroong grade sa WW, grade sa PT, and so on. So, for PT1, P2, WW1, ang dami na nagpapile up na yon. And then teachers would ask themselves, nobody knows what it is. It just sits there. No, I have no idea. I don't know. Search me. I haven't got a clue. Entrance exam sa class, sa school. Anong resulta ng mga teachers? Anong resulta ng entrance examination? Ang nakakaalam lang ay yung admin office o kaya registrar's office o kung sino man nag-admit ng entrance examination. Nag-interview during admission pero hindi sinabi meron bang problema sa language capacity or language skills sa mga bata so that we can prepare, kami mga language teachers, we could prepare. What I'm trying to say here is that we have a lot of assessment protocols in our schools, and yet they are not utilized to provide information to our teachers and to all people concerned so that they will be able to modify and contextualize all of their learning plans in such a way that address the needs of our students as they enter the school community. If not the school community, at least the teachers who are receiving a prior grade level would be able to prepare for the next grade level. A good example would be ang mga estudyante ng grade 7, I'm sorry, ang mga teacher ng grade 7 at the end of the grade 7, dapat i-consolidate nila ang mga data na to para bigyan po ng consolidated results of the assessment po para sa grade 8. Ang grade 8 naman, i-receive nila yung mga files na to, tapos babasihan nila, sino mga estudyante sa magiging estudyante ko sa klase ko, medyo may hina sa English, sa math, and so on. So anong level nila? Then I have to do something about that. All right? What we are doing in our schools is that we just keep on teaching and teaching and teaching, and then we get at the end of the year, we keep on saying, bakit gano'n? May mga problema sila. I should have identified that at the very beginning of the school year. Kasi nga hindi na-utilize ang assessment. They are just seen as products, but they are not seen as part of the process in the teaching, planning, in the planning, teaching of lessons. Okay, that's one scenario. Another scenario, look at this. The joy of learning. Nakalagay, si teacher nakatingin sa bata. David, it's problem 9. You know problem 9. Relax, relax. Tapos si supervisor nakalagay sa likod, ay si principal nakalagay sa likod, nakatingin kay teacher. No pressure, but if he misses problem 9, you're out of a teaching job. Naku, pag bumagsak pala. Ito yung nangyayari sa atin. Paano ko bumagsak ang bata, mahina ang bata, pero kailangan niyang ipasa kasi pag hindi ko siya pinasa, it reflects my performance. Diba? Parang, wait lang, hindi mo pwedeng tingnan natin, there's a possibility that okay, maaaring hindi ko na-explain na maayos, pero nag-reteach naman ako, pero wala pa rin nagawa. I did everything. Bakit kasalanan ko pa rin? Hindi ba pwedeng merong outside factors? Like, can the child be considered for referrals to the guidance office or somewhere, especially in the public schools, kanino pa i-refer para ma-assess kung merong learning disability sa mga bata? That's something about the mental and cognitive problems. Mataas ang IQ pero may mga problema naman sa cognition. It could be they have problems in processing mathematical skills kasi may mga bata na sobrang talino pero may sa math. Parang ako yata yun. Hindi naman sobrang talino. Tama lang, pero talagang I struggled before mathematics. Anyway, tapos sabi naman ng PEAC. Sorry, hindi yan PEAC. Basta someone that, evaluates the performance of the school. No biggie, but if he misses problem 9, will pull your accreditation or you'll bring shame on your community. Right? Para bang tinitingnan po natin na that the performance of our students, the assessment results of our students are automatically, again sabi ko, automatically reflects the performance of the teacher. Automatically, the performance of the teacher reflects the way the school administrators supervised the rollout of the curriculum. And then on that note, kung maraming bumagsak sa klase, may mga bumagsak sa klase at hindi natutunan ng mga bata, tatanggalin accreditation. Di ba sabi natin, kung sino po dapat ang medyo struggling na bata, yun dapat ang may kailangang maraming tulong. I think assessment is seen as here in this picture as a form of testing and evaluating what's good and what's best. It could be one of those, but then it should not be the core. Assessment should be seen as an information, a gathering of information to make informed-based decision to improve the learning process of students and the interaction between teachers and students. Kung ganun pala, pinipressure po natin ng mga teachers. So, hindi natin masisisi ang mga teachers sa field kung bakit minsan kahit bagsak ang mga bata, ipapasa. Bakit? Kung binagsak siya, kahit alam mo natin na talagang, sir, bumagsak kasi nga, nasa grade 7 siya, pero hindi naman niya natutunan ang mga dapat natutunan niya ng grade 1 up to grade 6. Diba? So, kasalanan na grade 7. Diba? Di ba pwede natin sabihin na, sir, kasalanan po ito ng grade 3. Hindi po naturo yung basic fractions po, pag basic operations on fractions. Hindi. Kahit pa yan na, dapat nasa grade 7, hindi po natin tingin ng accumulative problems of our students. And we automatically blame our teachers. Yes, there's a certain percentage of factor that that contributes to the failure of our students, but it's not 100%. I tell you, it's not 100%. May mga bata talaga na kailangan natin tutukan. At kung hindi natin siya tutukan on every grade level and we just pass them because this is the way we see assessment, bagsak ang bata. At bagsak si teacher. It becomes a stressful situation for all of us. So people, teachers, and all teachers, students, and parents, and school administrators dread assessment. Okay, let's have another scenario. Things improved when I took time to get to know my class. Okay, assessment yan. I agree. If we identify the cause of the problem, we can find a solution. So via assessment, we specifically find out the strengths and weaknesses of our students and which of those areas that students have already mastered. So this is a good way to see it. This is a good way, a scenario to see and consider assessment. I think one of my learns is dyslexic. Si nakita na identify nila yung specific problem, hindi agad si teacher ang problema. Di ba pwedeng may memory problem sa mga bata? Di ba pwedeng ang mga bata meron talagang cognitive problems, mahina, or remedial po sila? Kung remedial sila, maari pong hindi kasalanan ng grade level teacher, kundi yung previous grade level. So, hindi yan matuturo, hindi yan mareremedyohan ng grade level teacher. There should be a remediation program provided by the school to the students to help the teacher and the students. Okay? So let's now define, based on those pictures, those scenarios about assessment in the school, let us now define assessment and evaluation. Okay? So let's look at this grading, the grades of the following students. We have Amon Jane, and she got 88 in her grade, in her Filipino, 78 in English, 81 in science, and then 83 in mathematics. And then Barbosa Joseph got 83 in Filipino, 89 in English, 78 in science, and 84 in mathematics. And then Fermin Cecile got 89 in Filipino and 75 in English and 77 in science and 73 in mathematics. We have Go Galileo, username, friend, assistant superintendent po ng division of Cavite Province. I'm sorry, ginamit ko kitang pangalan. I couldn't think of other names of the other people. You came into my mind. So when I was doing the PowerPoint last time, I had to put your name here. Okay, Galileo, go. And then we have 85 for Filipino, and then 86 for English, 88 for science, and 85 for mathematics. Okay, and then Hera. Okay, in Greek mythology. And Hera Cheryl, 70% for that. Okay, the point there is that kung ibibigay po natin na results of the assessment, of all the forms of assessment that we provide for our students, ano ibig sabihin ng 88? Ano ang feedback ng sa bata? Is it just the grade, or there's more beyond the 88 that we cannot, tell our students? Anong description niya? Anong dapat gawin pa? Pag 88 ba, master na ang bata, mastery level na siya, mayroon pang gagawin. So, that's the end of it. Kaya ang mga bata, pag nakita nila, ang nasa utak nila, basta hindi lang 75, hindi lang 75, pag nagdang 77, hi! Kasi they're looking at learning as quantitative. Okay, it can be quantified. There are parts of our learning that can be quantified, but there are parts of our students' learning that has to be qualified, okay, interpreted in a qualitative perspective, and it cannot be just introduced here in the grading system. Okay, na ganito lang, talagang numeric lang po siya. And that's what's good about the other grading system in the world, that they go for more descriptive grading system than a numeric. I don't know why the Philippines went for we had debit order number 78 series of 2012, if my memory serves me right, that introduced the descriptive way of grading system. It's just that it was sidetracked or kicked out by debit order number 8 series of 2015. That became more numeric, okay, percentage numeric and then some descriptive. I don't know, but hopefully the Philippines will move on later on to more descriptive type of learning, okay, of assessment and grading system. Anyway, so yun lang po ang gusto kong sabihin sa assessment natin. So on the philosophical perspective of assessment shall be used primarily as a quality assurance tool. It's a QA. It's one of the tools for quality assurance. That assessment should be done before any activities given or learning programs provided for our students. And along the way, we provide them with formative assessment or strategies and activities for us to help our students cope with some of the breakdowns that they encounter during the learning process, and then another assessment at the end. We call them pre and post, so that we would know the extent and the quality of the learning of our students, and at the same time should also be seen as a way of looking at the effectiveness of approaches and strategies, also to look at the effectiveness of the delivery of the teacher, also to look at the effectiveness of the school support to the teaching and learning process, the environment, the material. So it has to be seen holistically, hindi lang po teacher per se. Hindi posible yung classroom environment na merong factor doon. Posible din po ang mga learning materials meron din. So these are ways. This assessment helps us look at all of these perspectives, all of these factors in the teaching and learning process. At the end of the day, what's happening, what the situation, the real situation of teaching and learning happens between the teacher and the student formally. And there are also what we call as informal learning, where the students learn from the other students and from all other extra and co-curricular activities. Nonetheless, those things should be assessed as well. All right. So these are the things that assessment is all about, to track students' progress in the attainment of standards. Nasaan na ba ang bata sa attainment natin ng standards? Okay? Promote self-reflection and personal accountability for one's learning. This is not just to reflect on how well the teacher has taught the subject, but also a way for students to reflect on. Kaya importante every after assessment, especially for summative assessment, nagka-conference kayo sa ng mga estudyante para ma-explain sa mga bata saan sila magaling at saan sila kailangan pa mag-improve on. Okay? Para they can do something about, para mayroong feedback sa kanila, anong re-reviewin pa nila, anong babalikan pa nila sa lesson na yun. Next, and provide a basis for the profiling of student performance. Kailangan natin ma-profile. If you want to know, sir, ano ibig sabihin ng profiling? Do go back to my previous webinars here in VIBAL, and I already talked about student profiling as one of the strategies that I've introduced in the Philippines. So I already have that, but I'm still in the process of finishing the profiling manual, which I said again, promised to be implemented first in the Sisters of Mary. Okay. So classroom assessment now can be categorized into traditional, and we have 4 non-traditional. I'm not going to mention the specifics there under that, but you know this already. But to make a more holistic way of doing assessment inside the classroom and for the whole school's program is to make a balance between traditional and non-traditional. Okay? Dapat ano po siya, balance. Merong formative, merong summative, meron siyang alternative assessment, meron siyang testing, merong pencil, merong paper pencil, may product po siya. So what happens in the K-12 curriculum is that our standards are for content and for performance, and therefore our curriculum, the K-12 curriculum, allows the schools to strike a balance, whether they like it or not, make a balance between the use of traditional assessment forms and non-traditional assessment forms. But we need to be careful, trudge a little, because there's what we call as appropriateness in the selection of traditional and non-traditional. It all depends on your curriculum plans. Okay. So assessment can be seen in 3 aspects. We have assessment for learning, that would be formative assessment, assessment as learning, self-assessment, and we have assessment of learning, the summative assessment. So we need to see that assessment is part of the learning progress of our students, and it's a way for our students to keep track of how well and what they are learning, what and how well they are learning. And then for learning, we need to see provide our students with strategies and activities inside the classroom that gives us feedback whether our students are doing well with the progress of the learning of the lesson. And at the end of all those lessons, say after a module, after a quarter, we provide summative assessment as to see the extent of the learning of our students. And if our students fail in the summative assessment, therefore, there's a possibility that the quality of formative assessment and self-assessment that we have provided for our students are not up par with the standards. Okay, so let's now focus on these 3. And I'll be providing certain strategies. It's already 3:40, don't worry. I know it's 61 slides, but I'll go quick as possible as I can. Okay, so let's go a little bit to British here, since we're talking about assessment. And a loss of my knowledge in assessment and evaluation came from Cambridge, and some of my friends have been friends who are working for Cambridge Assessment Unit. Tama na. Naglulukuhan tayo dito. Just, we'll talk about that later and use those accents later on. Okay, let's have the five basic purpose of assessment. One, it should provide diagnostic feedback. That being said, dapat meron po tayo palagi entry exam. Okay, entry assessment for our students. So ang mga bata natin na papasok sa grade 7, dapat may entrance examination or entry exam. At kung sila ay magtatapos na sa grade 7, dapat may exit exam po tayo. I think DepEd has already been clear about this, about the entry and exit exams, and I have been privy to the creation of the entry exit exams for senior high school and junior high school, and just quite recently, just a year ago, was it a year ago or 2 years ago? But just quite recently, we finished the entry and exit exams for journalism program in the Philippines, and it was quite beautiful in creating. Yeah, I'm sorry, I do see assessment as a beautiful process. Okay, it's just wonderful. Okay? Provide diagnostic feedback. So yun po, I think ito naglalak po sa atin. Hindi natin tinitingnan na ang assessment po natin should be given before any learning happens. Kasi nga, it should provide the results of this. Let us see kung ano ang entry level ng mga bata. So kung ganun po, kung hindi natin ginagawa yun, we are not being true to the principle of education, which means we need to teach where the students are coming from, or teach level, or teach the entry teach the students based on their entry level. How would we know the entry level of our students if we did not have diagnostic exam? So, kunwari, papasok sa grade 7, may entry exam. Tapos yung kanyang exit exam sa grade 7. Yung exit exam, hindi na kayo kailangan gumawa ng entry exam for grade 8. Kasi yung exit exam nyo sa grade 7, pwede na po rin yun, or assessment, pwede rin po yung gamitin as entry. Yung results nun, it summarizes what they have learned in grade 7, but it also summarizes their entry level to grade 8. So, dual purpose po, kung sandwich po yan as they go up to the higher grade levels, na sandwich po siya, they function as both diagnostic and summative. Okay. So these are the questions. If we are able to, this is the first. Okay, this is the first purpose of assessment. And you guys out there, I'm not angry. Okay? I'm just totally happy this happened. And if you people out there do not have entry exams for every grade level and exit exams for every after grade level and entry to the next grade level, kawawa po si teacher, kawawa po kasi wala po siyang basis as to how she will plan for the learning, or for the learning plans that she's going to create for the grade level. Kawawa naman siya. Ang tawag natin doon ay trial and error, hit and miss. Kawawa naman. So, sayang yung oras ng pagpaplano ng teacher. Okay? And then these are the questions that are answered if we follow and implement the first purpose of assessment, provide diagnostic feedback. What is the student's knowledge base? Okay? What is the student's performance base? What are the student's needs? Sasabihin nila, Sir, ginagawa niyo ba si Sister Sa Mary? Shh. Secret ko po yun. Secret po namin. Okay? Basta. And then finally, what has to be taught? Kasi makikita po natin, we're looking at assessment as diagnostic process that we get to find out what students' strengths and students' weaknesses. Alas, one of the many problems in implementing this purpose of assessment is that our teachers have few trainings. Okay, our classroom teachers, our administrators have few trainings on how to create valid and reliable. Kaya pag tinawag na valid, reliable siya. Pero di naman. Valid and reliable. Valid and reliable diagnostic instruments and tools. Pero ba po kayo niya sa Sister Sa Mary? Shh! Quiet lang. Okay, let's proceed to the second purpose of assessment. Help teachers The second purpose of assessment is to help teachers, supervisors, and school administrators set and refine standards. Ibig sabihin po nito, sa results ng test, kung meron kang exit, may entry kayo, makikita nyo ngayon, ma-evaluate that your assessment is your basis for refining and reviewing your curriculum plans. Your curriculum map, horizontal and vertical, parang hindi tama yung order natin, lalong naguguluhan ng bata. Yung ating paggawa na every quarter ng science, iba-iba area ng science, parang lalo walang continuity ng learning. This feedback provides, naibigay ba na nyo yan sa feedback sa DepEd? Kasi sa amin, na-experience ko talaga, I mean, not just with the Sisters of Mary, but other schools na mas lalong naguguluhan ng bata, walang namamaster well, content-wise, the content. I know that the focus there is skills, but then again, skills without content is nothing. Kaya don't give me that crap. That's, I mean, sir, ang focus ng science ay skills. Yeah, but without content, skills is difficult to teach. They go together. Don't give me that crap that skills lang ang focus ninyo. Learning is always both with context and content. Ang context, skill, context, and content. Nagdulukan tayo pag ganun skills lang ito. Sige, sir, ang tinuturo po namin ay how to do experimentation. Experimentation on what? Sa chemistry po, yes, good. Pero magkaiba ba ang mga protocols, ang procedure ng pag-experiment when it comes to, say, on biology, when you deal with organisms, microorganisms, as opposed to chemicals? Opo, sir, mag-iba. That's my point. The context changes. So kung every quarter nag-iba-iba po yan, assessment forms nabubuong si teacher kasi nabubuong din sa bata. So this feedback na walang continuity ng learning ng mga bata could also be a way for us to review our curriculum. And I hope that the experts out there, I'm not saying I'm expert in science, I'm not saying I'm expert in mathematics, but I've seen a lot of results from our students that the students struggle so much in their continuing of their learning of the subjects. We need to look into that too. And let us be humbled by these results and not be angry and saying, hindi natuturo, sisi agad sa mga schools. Baka naman mali, medyo magulo lang siguro ang design ninyo. I made faces. I shouldn't be doing that. I should be more scholarly. Okay, I should be scholarly today. And then, second purpose of assessment is to help teachers and supervisors, schools, and administrators set and refine standards. And it answers the following questions: what performance demonstrate understanding? Which of those activities? Ito na po sinasabi po natin na based on the results, makikita po natin ano yung mga activities na ginawa ng teacher, inaprobahan ng school, na gawin sa loob ng classroom na effective at pwedeng i-continue at i-retain for the next school year. Ano ang dapat palitan? Ang nangyayari, puro planning ang ginagawa, walang reviewing and evaluation of what teachers have done in the previous year and then retain what was effective and then change those that were not effective. Wala. Bago lahat. Usad ng usad. Everything is new. I'm not angry, I'm just saying. Let's proceed to the second question that we need to answer on the second purpose of assessment. What performance demonstrate knowledge? Is this ano mga tasks? Okay, ano yung mga tasks na pasok not just the change of behavior, well, syempre, pag change of behavior, that means there's already a change of mindset and a change of heart. Therefore, precipitating to a change of behavior kasi hindi pwedeng nag-change of behavior pero hindi naman nag-change ang mindset ng bata. That's being a charlatan pero hindi naman mangyayari yun kasi change of behavior is a byproduct of changes in the mindset and a change of the affect. Like, nandito rin ang affect have the cognition and the affect. Manifestation ng heart natin. And then we have, of course, what performance demonstrate mastery. Ano yung mga activities na talagang pasok na pasok sa standards at nag-enjoy yung mga bata but at the same time motivates them to give their best. Okay? Yun dapat ang titingnan natin. The third purpose of assessment, of course, is to evaluate teaching and learning progress. Titingnan po natin kung the quality of the interaction between the teacher and the students and all factors involved with that. So pag sinabi natin teaching learning process, we're not only looking at the behavior of the teacher, delivery of the teacher, the student behavior and the student learning of the learning content, but also we need to look into the environment, the learning environment, the materials used. So, dapat tinitingnan po natin lahat yun. Hindi lang agad ang tao involved. There are also non-person factor involved in the teaching learning process. It could also be the time. Okay? Posible po na, ako po, ang sinasabi ko lang po na minsan, nung ako na naman po, nag-aaral ako, mas madali kong maintindihan ang mathematics pag nasa umaga because when I was learning, I was more of a morning person. Ngayon, evening person. Well, ngayon kasi sa trabaho, all-day person na po. Wala nang pinili. Anyway, so these are the questions that we need to answer if we are to satisfy the purpose number 3 of assessment. How is the student doing? So these are the things we need to ask. So naglagay po ako ng mga questions dito para ito po talaga ang itatanong natin sa mga teachers or co-teachers ask each other on the perspective of evaluating teaching learning. So at the end of the day, how is the student doing? Or how is my student doing? What has the student learned? Nakuha ba nila lahat ang mga dapat ituro sa kanila o ang mga tinuro sa kanila? Can the student talk about the new knowledge? Do they talk about the information or after me discussing all of the things, they have forgotten that? Next, can the student demonstrate and use the new skill in the project? Have I thought of a good project that directly applies what they are learning from the lesson into the creation of the project or performance? What the teaching methods or approaches are most effective? Ano yung mga effective na approach? So I could retain that. At anong hindi? So I would be able to change that. If not this year, if not this quarter, at least in the second quarter, I can do something about that. Or if I was not able to assess that in the whole year, I could do something about that the next year, so I could evaluate everything I have done in this school year. And finally, what changes or modifications to a lesson are needed to help the students? Ano yung mga dapat natin gawin? Does it help that nung ako yung nagtuturo sa De La Salle University, araw-araw, kasi ang tinuturo ko naman kasi ng oral communication. So ang ginagawa ko, every time na magmi-meet kami, there's oral recitation. Oral communication. So that's my way for making them talk. Tapos there was a student of mine saying, sir, kasi shy po talaga ako, but magaling po ako sa written exam. Hey, that's only one aspect of this class. You need to be able to talk. Kasi nga oral communication ito. Of course, you will be assessed on the paper pencil. That's traditional for me to know if you have gained the principles that I have taught you about. The different philosophies, theories of communication and oral communication. But nonetheless, I need to see the performance that you can definitely acclimatize yourself to different social communication situations. That's my point. All right. Let's now proceed to the fourth purpose of assessment, and that is to motivate students. So assessment should not only be seen as to a way of assessing the extent of the learning of our students, but also let's look at whether they are motivated to learn even more. Okay. Questions like, tanong po sa mga bata, now that I'm in charge of my learning, how am I doing? Yung ang binibigay pa natin assessment sa bata ay makes them see what they have learned, and what they need to do about things that they have not mastered yet. Now that I know how I'm doing, how can I do better? A good example would be, pagkatapos ng quarter exam, out of 50, 37 siya. O ano ngayon kung 37 out of 50 po siya? Ano ang mga areas na dapat niyang balikan at reviewin? Kasi definitely lalabas po siya sa exit exams. So dapat hindi lang po scores ang bibigay sa bata, dapat ginagamit ulit ang table of specifications, okay, to do item analysis and to give feedback to the students. So ating table of specifications, which I will not discuss in detail, table specifications being required of us by the Department of Education is not only a way of creating the test to make sure that the tests we create are valid, but it's also a way for us, a blueprint, a basis for us to provide our students with feedback on their learning, and eventually would motivate them to know where they are and do something about that. And finally, what else would I like to learn? Ano pa yung mga dapat, from what I have learned, what else what I want to learn? Kasi sabi nga nila, a good indicator that our students are motivated to learn is that once they know that they learned this, they get to realize they need to know more. Diba? Maganda po yun. Now, students get to be, the one indicator that students are motivated to learn is that they acknowledge that they have learned something from the lesson, but they want to know more. Yan. Pag nagtanong ng yung nga sinasabi natin incidental learning, let me change my position naman kasi sa nakakangalay. And let's proceed to fifth purpose. And it's already 3:55. Fifth purpose, motivate teachers. Okay? It is not only motivated the students, but also motivate the teachers. What is working for students? Okay? What can I do to help students more? And then what direction should we go next? So it motivate teachers na pag tamang ginagawa niya, pag feeling niya may natutunan talaga mga bata, parang it's already a feedback to the teachers that, wow, I have done something right for my students. So it also motivates teachers to go on what they're doing. And when they see their students are learning fast and really well, nakaka-motivate kay teacher, and sometimes they forget all of those stressful nights, stressful days of preparing and checking the results of the test and even instruction. Let's proceed to the next part, designing and selecting, organizing. We're now on the second last most part. Don't worry, you're almost there. Designing and selecting, organizing, and utilizing varied assessment and strategies. So let's start with this holistic assessment. Okay, I'm presenting to you a framework of assessment that I believe in. So kayo po dun sa labas na hindi kayo naniniwala nito, it's okay po. But I'm presenting to you something that I have been doing that I see that it should be implemented in all schools. This is what I've learned also from some of my friends, experts that have been doing a lot of assessment, and I have confirmed this with wag ko na sabi ko kanino po para baka di niya gustuhin na kailangan mention niyan. But the point there is that we need to, assessment is used in all aspects of the learning and teaching and learning process of both students and teachers. Okay, so we call it as holistic assessment. So do read a lot on holistic assessment. All right. So the first aspect or the first element of holistic assessment is assessment of learning. Okay. Now, when we say assessment of learning, the assessment of learning are the strategies that the teacher use to help students understand the lesson that they are teaching. Ulitin ko po ha. Assessment as learning are the strategies that the teacher thought of that could help students understand the lesson. Therefore, the learning activities like small group activities, collaborative activities, the drills, the exercises, the questions that you ask, most importantly, and the order of your activities in your lesson are what we call assessment as learning. These are strategies that you design in such a way that students will be helped to understand the lesson. And at the end of the day, after all the intricate planning of your lessons, you get to realize that students have not got it. It could also be a feedback to us teachers, that probably the strategies or the activities that we created for this particular lesson is not appropriate, suitable to the level of my students, to the interests of my students, and to the level of cognition of my students, to the point that it becomes more difficult for students to learn. Because you may think that the strategies and these activities are interesting, but at the end of the day, you need to understand that it's the students who decide. Okay, it's the students. The students are the ones. It's the students. The students are the one who decide and determine whether the activities that we have provided for them, that assessment as learning, are interesting and motivating for them. Hindi po tayo. Okay? Nakadagdag lang po tayo sa pag-boost ng confidence nila. So, the activities that we provide for them give us feedback on individual cognition or affect. Sino nakakuha agad ng lesson, sinong hindi, right? So nakita mo na hindi nakukuha ng bata, anong gagawin mo? That's when we get to do intervention. The results. Yung mga bata na hindi nag-struggle sa practice. So, kunwari sa mathematics, nag-drilling ka, nag-exercise ka, nagbigay ka ng board work, ikaw at saka napakita ka sa mga bata. Tapos struggling pa rin ng bata. So anong gagawin mo? Dagdag ka pa. Mag-intervene ka ulit. Okay? Do you get it? No, hindi pa po. Hindi pa rin nakuha. Isang example lang ibibigay ko. Alam mo, nagsabi na nag-honest na yung bata na nagsasabi na, Sir, hindi ko po nakuha ang explanation. Could you please slow down? Maring tama po ang board work as a strategy, but probably your speed is not appropriate to some students. So hindi ulit ang activity lang ang tinitingnan natin doon. the way we deliver, the delivery, how many aspects. It could be the way you use the language, okay, the MOTL or medium of teaching and learning. It could also be your speed of delivery of the lesson. It could also be uh, uh, ang tawag natin doon, yung acoustics of the classroom. Na sobrang ingay sa labas, nadidistract ang bata, hindi siya makafocus. Okay? So intervention agad. Ano gagawin mo? O sinabi ng bata hindi niya maintindihan, ano gagawin mo? O di magbigay ka ulit ng example. Rather and then, alam mong hindi naintindihan ng bata, nag-struggle siya, mag-intervene ka na agad. Do not say, bahala ka. O di, kayo nung kasalanan, yung sinasabi ng mga administrators, kasalanan mo. Nang umamin na nga ang bata, based on the results nga, nagsabi na nga hindi nakukuha ng bata, assessment as learning na yun ha. So feedback yan kung naintindihan ng bata o hindi. Hindi ka nagbigay, hindi ka nag-slow down, hindi ka nagbigay ng activity, basta sabihin, basta matapos ko to kasi meron pa tayong gagawin, hindi kasalanan mo. So talagang i-blame ka ng school administrator. You do not listen. Your students are, at the end of the day, the students are the ones who will determine whether they are getting it or not you. Okay. Next is would be assessment for learning. So when we say assessment for learning, these are some of the activities similar to assessment as learning. But we look at this as a way, specific activities that identify whether students are getting the learning competencies. Diba? May mga activities tayo or may mga strategies tayo na nakatulong sa bata sa pagtulong. Halimbawa, art of questioning, yung mga pagtatanong natin, pagbibigay natin ng tanong, pagbibigay ng mga pictures, those are assessment as learning. Pero pagdating sa assessment for learning, these are the specific activities that are matched to the learning competencies that you identify for that lesson that help students realize those learning competencies. Now, after the activity or after the activity, you found out that students were not able to get it, okay? It provides you with the feedback on instruction to review, reteach, and continue. Now, after all of these activities that you have provided for them, hindi pa rin nakuha ng bata, then there should be reteaching. What happens is that pagkatapos ng Quran, nagpa-quiz ka o nagpa-recitation ka, hindi pa rin nakuha ng bata, wala ng oras, kailan pa magtuloy-tuloy. So, hindi naman kailangan mag-reteach ka. That's what's good thing about pandemic is that we can do blended learning, na hindi na kailangan ang learning at saka input and reteaching can be done inside the classroom. It could be provided for our students in their house, in their homes. Na magbibigay ka na lang na okay for improvement, for understanding. So I have a video to help you learn more some of the concepts that you you had difficulty with. All right? So ang tawag po doon ay intervention. Pag nakita mo na hindi nakuha ng bata, doing reteaching, doing review the next day, or doing review the next week kasi after all the week's activity, hindi pa rin nakuha ng bata. You make decisions whether to continue on to the next lesson or not. Those are intervention programs. Okay? So holistic assessment pa rin siya. And the third aspect or element of holistic assessment is what we call as assessment of learning. These are normally, we call them as summative assessment. This is now given to our students at the end of a module, perhaps, or at the end of a learning continuum or episode learning. No, a learning continuum is a 1 quarter, and within a quarter, there are episodes. Okay, episodes, ibig sabihin, you cluster the learning competences together that they are to be in that cluster of lessons or module kasi alam mong para sila ng topic. Pareho po sila ng theme. So you cluster them. So the learning continuum from the quarter. So in a school year, it's a learning continuum for them. Quarter 1 is an episode, a learning episode. Quarter 2 is a learning episode. Quarter 3 is a learning. So there are 4 learning episodes in a learning continuum of 1 school year. But within 1 learning episode, which is a quarter, it can be considered also as a micro learning continuum, and there are specific learning episodes. Sa mga specific learning episodes na yon, dapat magbigay po tayo ng summative assessment para malaman po natin ready na ba ang bata for the next type of lesson, the learning episode. Bakit po? Para makita po natin. Kasi nga, the way we have designed our curriculum is that what they learn from one lesson or from one module builds on to higher forms of learning competencies and the next level, like in mathematics and science and English and all other subject areas. And if they have not acquired the necessary competencies in the previous grade level. So what's the point of continuing on? Kasi nga kailangan po yun as baseline for them to learn the next lessons. Yeah. The summative assessment is for us, basis for us whether we need to reteach, to review. Kung hindi na, maraming estudyante ang hindi nakaintindi, bumagsak sa summative assessment, aba reteach po talaga yan. And when we say reteach, huwag na po. I was about to say na paano ginagawa reteaching. That would be later on. So meron po tayong seminar later on. But you should do reteaching kung marami bumagsak. 50% or 60% of your students, of your population in your class, fail the class, talagang reteach yan. Pero kung sa tingin mo, konti lang ang mga hindi, may mga areas lang po na hindi nakuha ng bata, nakapasa sila lahat, pero may mga areas na students are struggling with, you just do re-review on the areas na hindi masyado naintindihan ng bata. And that's how beautiful table of specifications are. They help you see which areas, which learning competencies students have not mastered yet, and that will be your basis for conducting review, and perhaps also reteaching as well on those areas, and then continue on with the next lesson if all of your students already have mastered it. Sir, paano kung meron pong one or two na hindi nakuha ng bata? Then you can create intervention programs later on as pull out. Ibig sabihin pull out po natin, continue with the lesson, but then again, bibigyan mo pa rin ng review and reteaching for the students, probably outside the school activity, perhaps 15 minutes at the end of the day, or kayo po, intervention program na ang tawag po natin ay pull out. Sir, could you please provide us with those programs of intervention? We're talking about assessment today. So intervention programs, go back, pakibulat pa kasi I already talked about intervention programs before, so you may want to review our webinars on interventions. That was, I think, August then. So you go back to, please. Okay, so I'm talking about assessment for this afternoon. All right. Intervention. Sir, could you please provide us with specific strategies on assessment as learning, assessment for learning, and assessment of learning, since we're talking about designing, selecting, and all right, sure. So let's first look at assessment as learning. We're almost there, don't worry, it's already 4:07. So the teacher's role in promoting development of independent learners through assessment as learning is to, one, model and teach the skills of assessment. Okay? So kung anumang tinuturo daw natin as form of assessment as learning, kung anumang skills na tinuturo natin sa bata, anumang knowledge na itinuturo sa atin ng bata, teacher becomes the assessment tool, the strategy that serves as a benchmark for students to take on this learning competencies, to take on this knowledge and these skills. Kasi nga dapat i-model po natin yon. Hindi pwedeng, sige, solve niyo po ito. Sir, huwag niyo kami pag-solve. Dapat turuan mo muna kami, ipakita mo muna. Ikaw nakakaalam, kami po ay nag-aaral pa lang. Po. Alam mo yun nung ako nag-aaral ako noon ng, I think it was high school, I think. And our lesson in English was all about direct object at saka indirect object. Tapos ang ginawa ng teacher namin ay instead of teaching, ang ginawa niya pa-report. So napunta po sa akin ang reporting on direct object and indirect object in sentences. Sabi ko, patay. I think that was grade 8 or grade 9, something like that. Tapos, pinag-report sa akin. Tapos habang nag-report ako, tanong ng teacher, sabi niya, are you sure? In that sentence, are you sure that you have identified the correct and direct? So could you please define to us what's indirect object and direct object? Or what are those forms? Sabi ko, nainis na ako. Sabi ko, to be honest, I don't know all of this. I'm just reporting this based on the facts that I have researched in our textbooks. But I think you're supposed to be the one teaching us this and us looking at how you do it so that we are learning from you and not you from us. Sumagot ako ng ganun, Francis, sa manang ugali ko ng mga panahon na yun. Anyway, but after that, yung teacher naging parang close kasi sa akin. Sabi niya, I never realized that there are students in high school that, could talk back to the teachers and make us realize. So yung mga ginawa ko sa kanila is assessment of learning. Yung pagsasabi ng mabutit ang English teacher namin nun ay nakinig sa akin. So kasi yung frustration ko sa reporting as a strategy of assessment as learning is not appropriate for me. Hindi ko pa nga alam yan eh. Hindi ko pa nga alam kung paano ano ang mga parts ng mga simple. Noong panahon namin kasi na mga sentences, structures, and functions nasa high school pa lang. Tapos ipapa-report mo sa amin, ginagawa namin ang trabaho mo, kami nang gumagawa. Noong panahon namin noon. So feedback from the students are also a way for us to see whether our strategies that we have or activities that we have thought of for our students are effective or not. So model and teach the skills. So when you choose strategies there, okay po ang reporting as but not for new lessons. Kung alam mong first time ng mga bata, matututunan ang lesson na to, huwag ka muna magpagkawa ng reporting, ng mga dramatization, kasi nga dapat input mo na yan. Kasi nga pa dapat first time nila, unless ang ginawa po na ay flip classroom. Pag sinabi natin flip classroom, paparesearch po na sa mga bata, magbabasa po na sila, pero papasok ka pa rin to help them understand what they have researched on or what they have read in advance. Pero hindi nyo papareport. Ang gagawin mo ay papasok ka to clarify and refine their understanding. So discussion. Discussion is a strategy for assessment as learning. Next, guide students in setting goals and monitoring their progress toward them. Okay, the way you inspire your students, the way you talk, your verbal and uh, uh, nonverbal skills are also strategies that would help our students be motivated to listen and to learn the subject. So it's a strategy too. Okay. Next, provide exemplars and models. Um, sorry. Mayroon kasi nakalagay sa akin mga pictures eh. Models of good practice and quality work that reflect curriculum outcomes could be showing to them some exemplary outputs, and then you would tell them that, yeah, these are very good products, but I want you to come up with your own interpretation of this and be more creative, and I think you can do better than this. Wow, what a motivation. Right? So it motivates students to, yung pala sir, gagalingin ko pa. Meron po kasi akong ugali na ganun so yan ang pinapakita yung magaling mag-iisip ako na mas magaling dyan. Because meron po akong sinasabi na, superiority complex. I would always want to be the first. I always want to be the one to think of something. Anyway, I don't know if it's good, I don't know if it's bad, but it works well. Fourth, work with students to develop clear criteria of good practice. So providing your students with answers to their questions, helping them do things, giving them examples are way of doing assessment as learning. These are support. So support to your students are your intervention program that you are now trying to read the body language of your students, listen to the comments of your students, and modify the way you teach so that the way you come up with activities that helps your students learn even more the lesson. So that's assessment as learning. All right. Next would be guide students in developing ayoko sa Zoom natatabunan yung mga statements at hindi ko siya mabasa. Okay. Feedback on self-monitoring mechanisms to validate and question their own thinking and to become, ito yung sinasabi natin ng mga questions before activities. The guide questions are also assessment as learning. It helps them focus on the information that they need to focus on. So look at the activity without a guide question or any activity sheets. Ang mga bata sa utak niya, dapat ko matutunan dito. So with activity sheets, explaining what they need to do with the activities for the lesson helps them guide what they're supposed to do and what they're supposed to learn from the lesson. So these are forms of assessment as learning. Provide regular challenging opportunities to practice so that students can become confident, competent self-assessors. Okay, monitor students' metacognitive processes as well as their learning and provide descriptive feedback. So feedbacking is giving feedback. There's no feedbacking. Giving feedback to your students as far as they're doing well, how they're doing well, or what they need to improve on is also good. It's a good way as an assessment as learning. Okay, so I would say that the dialogues and conversations between teachers and students are good strategies and a good way to help our students improve their, well, not just for students, but also for teachers, improve their learning and their teaching ways. So constant dialogue is very important. Sensitivity from the teacher's perspective on the behavior of the students. Kasi may mga teacher kasi na ang tawag nito, ang mamanhid, nakita na nga mga bata na nawawala ng interest, hindi na nakatingin. Those are already assessment. Nakita mo na wala lang interest sa mga bata. So that's a way for you to do some intervention already. Do something about that. Modify what you're doing. Baka hindi sila interesado. Anong gagawin ng teacher agad? Misbehavior. Misbehavior agad? Hindi mo pwedeng nahirapan lang ang mga bata. Some of the misbehaviors, the results of the misbehaviors of our students also rooted on one, ineffective strategy. Boring explanation. And that could also be other factors involved. There could be nutrition, it could be mental skills deficit and all. But again, these are factors that are intertwined together. Let's now look at assessment for learning. So assessment for learning, these are the five parts teachers should do something about. So one, become competent masters themselves of each of the standards their students are to master. So almost magkapareho po sila sa assessment as learning. Kaya lang sa assessment as learning, these are strategies that help students, reflect and think for themselves. Nasaan na ba ako? While assessment for learning are both for students and teachers, where they are realizing the competencies given the activities that the teachers have given, that thought out, the teacher thought out for them. Understand how those standards transform into the curriculum that informs scaffolding students will climb on their journey of standards, yung tamang pagkaka-sequencing, dapat yung pinaka-low level to higher order thinking skills kind of activities. Transform classroom level achievement, transform classroom targets into high quality classroom, and then use assessment over time in collaborating with students to help motivate them to keep learning. So these are some strategies. Yung kung basahin kasi I get bored with just reading. So let me give you now some strategies. So art of questioning, okay, art of question and types of questions also are good strategies for assessment as learning and assessment for learning. So you must create comprehending questions. Comprehending questions are those that facilitate students to understand. So go back again po kayo sa training ko po on comprehending narratives and comprehending expository text. I already explained kung ano ang tamang pagkakasunod ng mga tanong or what are the questions that you need to ask. It depends on the type of lesson or the type of information that you are providing for your students. Hindi po pwedeng para-pareho po ang order ng questions natin or comprehending questions natin. So if it's narrative ang ginamit po ninyo or narrative in nature, so you focus more on the conflict. So if your questions, the information you're giving them is more of factual, so dapat ang tatanong mo ay, what is the lesson about? So look at for the superordinate, the topic, the main idea, and supporting details. So comprehending questions. Next would be organizing questions. Questions that help students organize the ideas, like how many phases are being presented or explained in the water cycle. Water cycle din naman ako, in the water cycle, how many? So by recalling how many, the order, it helps students organize this information. It facilitates the organization and easy recall of this information in their memories. The next one is elaboration. Like, could you expound on this? What examples? Could you come up with an example for on this? Or kung hindi naman explanation, could you draw something? Or could you look for a picture that shows an example on this? Is there an example in the book that you think explicates the information or the meaning of the lesson or the meaning of the topic we're learning today? So naghahanap ka, nag-elaborate ka pa. And then of course, monitoring. Yung cognitive, ang tawag po natin dito ay mga follow-up questions. Okay? A lot of teachers are good in making major questions or content-based questions, but fail to make follow-up questions. Because what requires us, especially for elaborating and monitoring questions which fall under follow-up questions, teachers need to listen to the answers of our students. Alas, a lot of teachers, when students are answering the questions of teachers, are already busy in their mind what's the next activity, or in their minds are thinking what's the next question that I have placed in my lesson plan. Yung mga ganun ba? So dapat ang focus po natin dito sa assessment as learning, assessment for learning, is the interaction between the teacher and the student. So listening is very important as a strategy. There would be techniques as well for asking the questions in assessment of learning, assessment for learning. So focusing questions. Guide questions are good focusing questions. And the guide questions should have questions for comprehending questions, organizing questions, elaborating questions, and for monitoring questions. So yung apat na questions na yun could be asked in focusing questions. Now, extending, questions are designed to elicit clarification and elaboration. So ito yung pagsasabi po natin, alam natin na medyo mali ang sagot ng bata. Huwag po natin sasabihin na you're wrong. No, we create follow-up questions or extending questions like, do you have an example for this? Hindi mo sasabihin na mali ang bata. Because kasi kung magsasabi ng mali, kung sinabihin mong bata na siya ang mali, during discussions po ito, That's assessment for learning, assessment as learning. Sinabi mo sa bata na mali siya, so ang bata hindi natututong mag self-reflect kung saan, kung tama ba ang iniisip ko, tama ba pagkaintindi ko. So students get to be dependent on the feedback from the teachers kung tama sila o hindi. That's good too. Pero dapat at the end of the day, we would like our students to be more independent on their monitoring of self-monitoring of their learning. So questions are really good at that, and withholding withholding the right answer, or comments like you are right and your answer is correct, is also making our students extend their ideas, contest their own ideas. That I think that's one of the nature of extending questions, especially for sciences, and must have proof. Next, lifting is lifting question lifting. It's a crucial type of delivering questions. It's through questioning or other means that the teacher lifts the discussion to a higher level. Yung sinasabi natin, okay, pagkatapos natin ng factual question, like halimbawa, what are the phases of the water cycle? Okay, focusing question. Uh, what are the factors or variables involved in the water cycle? Okay, that would be the extending. Could you cite an example? Extending tayo. All right. So, why is what is the purpose, or what is the importance of water cycle in our planet? Yun. You're now lifting. So pag nakuha na batang lower level, lifting questions is using what students have answered and have learned in one type of activity and moving on to the next higher form of activity. Okay? Ang tawag po natin ay gradual release of responsibility, or GPU. GPU, gradual psychological unfolding from lower order going to higher order thinking skills. Right? Substantiating is another strategy of asking questions. Is question ask what evidence they found of what standards. So substantiating, what are your proof? Okay, what are could you give some example? Can you give not examples? That's elaborating. Could you cite references or sources where you got that information? And substantiating ang tawag po natin. I'm not gonna go discuss this anymore. Wala na po kasi tayong time then. That could be specific strategies for learning. Let's proceed to assessment for learning. Last na po yan, assessment for learning. The teacher and whole school administration and supervisory team need to, okay, number one, evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing against some standard and benchmark. Ito yung sasabi natin sa assessment. Dapat meron ng standards. Our students are not being assessed against the set standards and the learning competencies that they should have acquired in the course of learning. While assessment as learning and for learning while instruction happens and while learning happens. Okay, student results to guide the efforts. Okay, activities of both students and teachers and subsequent lessons, modules, and quarter or grading periods. So how do we do assessment for learning? Summative assessment. How do we create summative assessment? We create first a table of specifications, and the table of specifications are to be approved by your supervisors. And once approved po, ang TOS will now be the basis for creating your test questions, or your test questions. And then the test questions will be subjected back to the table of specification for its validity. All right? Once it's valid now, it will now be subjected to, of course, language editing na tama po to sanitize. Kaya po marami po mga questions na inilabas sa DepEd, DepEd ba yun, or private school, about sa mga names na very suggestive, sexually suggestive, kasi hindi po nag-undergo po ng tamang language editing. Ang tawag po natin doon ay sanitize. We need to do desensitizing, sanitation of the language of assessment. It's if we sanitize our language in delivery of the lessons, it is the same process being done to assessment. In the assessment format, our students must be able to learn from it too, but at the same time, actualize and assess what our students have learned in terms of extent. Let's just go through things. So the teacher-made assessment tool test achievement R could be select formats, multiple choice questions, true false statements, supply formats, filling questions, closed test, extended response. Now for assessment for learning and assessment as learning, I would go for supply and formats, filling questions, closed test, extended responses like essay. But for summative tests and like quarter assessments, I would go for multiple choice questions already for validity purposes and test for item analysis. It may be the most difficult type of question or test format or test type format to create, but it lends itself for a more valid way of checking whether students have learned something from the learning episode. I will end my discussion here. All about assessment, like the strategy. Sir, paano gumawa ng table of specification? Sir, paano gumawa ng test question? Sir, paano gumawa ng rubrics? Those are forms of assessment that we have discussed a while ago about the balance, striking a balance between traditional and non-traditional form assessment. So more specific topics will be provided for you later on. So this is more of what you should know about assessment as form of your professionalizing your practices as teachers in the classroom. So at this point, I'm now ready to accept questions.
Thank you very much, brother. Now we will proceed to the question and answer portion.
Mhm.
Our first question is from Donna Suico. What simple assessment strategies can we use every day, especially in online teaching po?
On that note, the most simple, we're looking at, again, your question should be contextualized. Sir, is this assessment as learning assessment? Babalik lang po natin. So, isa-isayin ko na lang kasi hindi na contextualized. Now, for online teaching, I would go for simple questions. Questions are very good. Collaborative activities. Um, let's start first with card questions. Ako, ang pinakaunang-unang ginagawa ko na assessment strategies would be presenting, of course, the learning competencies. The learning competencies, we call it a direct teaching, but at the same time provides us the way for students to be guided on what they're supposed to learn. So at the end of the day, let's go back. So kung anong sinimula, di ba? Simula mo ng, today we're going to satisfy this learning competency. Identify, o kaya, punta po tayo sa English. Um, categorize common nouns from proper nouns. Kunwari ganun po ang learning competence, okay? Today, we're going to learn about how to categorize nouns into common nouns and common nouns. So these are the activities we're going to do today. So I would like you to look at the pictures. So kung paano kayo nagsimula sa learning competencies, when you end your lesson, the online teaching, okay, let's go back to our learning competency, okay? Where you categorize nouns into common nouns and common nouns. Now ask yourselves, are you now able to categorize nouns into proper nouns and common nouns? Okay, now let's find out if you really can do that. Let's now have the following evaluation activity. I have here pictures. Okay, I have pictures here. I have some words here, and I would like you to place these words into two columns. The first column, or column A, would be proper nouns, and common nouns, and column B would be proper nouns. So, explicit teaching strategy is also a good assessment while you are conducting online. Also, activity sheets that you provide your students with, na kung habang nag-online kayo, napadala mo sila ng activity sheets. Ito po ay maganda rin pong assessment for learning, assessment as learning. Nakikita nyo kung naintindihan ng bata yung modules sa bahay nila at na-augment ba ang kanilang understanding sa inyong lecture. Yun nga po ang struggle natin ngayon is paano po gaano kabilis na ibabalik ang activity sheet sa teacher para nakagawa si teacher ng modification on the online delivery of lessons the next week. Kasi nga, yun po ang problema sa ganitong setup po natin, ang turnover ng yung mga assessment, yung mga activity sheets as feedback assessment forms for us to whether our students are getting it. Then you realize na pagkatapos ng naku, ang dami hindi nakaintindi. Kaya lang nakaprepare ka na for the next week na lesson. So this is the question now. Should you continue what you have planned or consider your students' results in the activity sheets? So yun po ang masasabi ko lang po sa inyo na medyo limited po tayo ngayon sa assessment as learning and for learning. One, kasi nga we have to be more sensitive with their facial body language reading sa mga bata because nga distance nga minsan hindi totoong body language ang napapakita ng mga bata. Minsan walang camera so hindi talaga natin nakikita kung naintindihan ng bata. So we rely so much on activity sheets or the accomplishment of the activity sheets. And then on the turnover, how quick the turnover of the activity sheets, di natin kung nung gano'ng kabilis. Kaya kung mabilis naman po, nakukuha agad ng mga messenger po natin, ng school natin, at nagagawa nyo na po at nababasa nyo agad at nakikita nyo if you're going to do reteaching and feedback, reteaching or continuing of the next lesson, then so good. Mahirap po kasi magawa ng assessment online. Kagaya na po narinig ko sa isang school, nagkaroon po siya ng quiz online. How sure are you that the students are, tapos walang camera, how sure are you that students are doing, answering the quizzes online na wala pong open notes? Unless ginawa nyo pong open notes. So guys sa PhD, hindi naman po kagaya sa PhD, especially if the learning competences they're supposed to, like the verbs are identify, classify, tapos, ang ginawa niyo pong quiz ay identification to satisfy those learning competencies. So, hindi mo alam kung talagang objectively nasasagot ng mga bata. Sir, paano kung quizzes po na nilagay sa modules po, tapos ang mga magulang po ang nakakaalam na mga key corrections na sa end po ng module. Again, kung inorient po ang mga magulang on the purpose of assessment and the purpose of instruction and having that, so I think parents would, be able to clearly support the teacher's purpose in the assessment na hindi niya ibibigay yung tamang sagot. But alas, based on my experience, some parents really would like their students to pass the quizzes and the tests and the activities in the modules. So, dahil na-orient sila na kung nasaan nakalagay ang key to correction, kung mali ang sagot ng mga bata, dahil alam na ng mga magulang ang tamang sagot, kinaguide nila sa tamang sagot. So, hindi na natin alam kung ang ginagraduhan po natin ay ang bata talaga, ang natutunan ng bata o ang natutunan ng nanay at tatay. These are struggles. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, brother. Our next question is from Rosemary Amparado. Bagsak o mababa po ba ang isang teacher sa evaluation kapag ang mga students niya ay bagsak ang grades?
Depende po sa porsyento ng mga estudyante. Kung sabihin po natin na meron kasi meron po akong isang experience. I'm not gonna mention kung anong school yun kasi baka kilala nyo kasi baka you're coming from different schools in the Philippines. Pero akong kilala na in-refer sa akin what would be the best and most professional way to deal with this. Binagsak ng isang English teacher ang lahat ng estudyante dahil hindi nakapag-submit ng final requirement. Sabi ko naman it's a feedback now to the teacher kasi nga final requirement, what about the other requirements? Just the final requirement po ba? Ibig sabihin po nun, anong ginamit ni teacher? Emotion ba or logic? Kasi kung final requirement, hindi naman, may porsyento naman lang yon sa ating grading system. Hindi naman lang hindi man na-consider yung iba. We also consider the grades in the first quarter, the second quarter, or the performance of students in the first quarter, second quarter. Kung nakita po natin, bumagsak sila lahat, tapos pasado naman sila in the previous quarters, ano nangyari? So I would say that on that note, kung ganun po ang perspektibo ng bagsak ng bata, may teacher factor. There could be a high percentage that we could identify that the failure came from the teacher. Now, kung sabihin po natin 50, there could be a possibility of the way may teacher factor po, pero hindi ganun kataas ang porsyento ng pag-blame, hindi naman pag-blame, na pag-identify kung saan nagkaroon ng problema sa teaching learning process. That could be a possibility that nagkaroon po ng hindi kilala ng teacher masyado. It happens in the first part. Makikita niyo naman po sa performance ng mga teachers on the first quarter of the school year, medyo mabababa ang grades ng mga bata dahil si teacher 1, hindi pa ganun kaganda, hindi pa niya nakakapa ang effectiveness ng kanyang pagtuturo kasi nga hindi pa niya kilala ang mga bata masyado. Hindi pa niya namomodify ang kanyang style, hindi pa niya namomodify ang kanyang strategy selections, designing of the lessons, sa pangangailangan ng mga bata. Kasi on the first year, hindi pa niya kilala masyado mga bata. On that note, kung bumagsak po ang mga bata, huwag mo natin sabihin agad na teacher factor. There's a possibility, nagkakakilanlan pa lang po, nagkakapaan pa po ang bata at mga estudyante. On the perspective of learning, hindi yung whatever you're thinking about or whatever. So, yun pong sinasabi ko na dapat yung entry level. Kung if you would like to if we would like to help our teachers be able to prepare lessons na talagang based on the needs of the students, dapat po talaga meron po tayong assessment as diagnosis for our students. And that's what I've been advocating in the past years na dapat meron mga diagnostic instruments. Ngayon, after all the diagnostic instruments and results provided for the teacher, binagsak pa rin yung mga bata, then masasabi po natin there's a possibility that the teacher is not delivering the lesson and meeting the students halfway. It's para sa akin kasi teaching and learning is like dancing tango. It takes two to tango. Hindi pwedeng magaling ka lang na teacher, pero hindi magaling ka na teacher, matalino kang teacher, pero hindi mo na-adjust ang inyong delivery. I'm not saying adjusting the standards, but there's what we call as adjusting the delivery of the standards to the students to make it more comprehensible for them. At the end of the day, I would like to say that a good teacher is the one who can finish the lessons and make students appreciate the lessons taught to them. But the best teacher is someone who makes who refines the her or his delivery of the lesson, that students appreciate not just appreciate the lesson but understands the lessons and applies that in their daily lives, because the teacher was able to make a difficult lesson very understandable for students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, brother. That's all the questions we have for now. Any last reminders to our viewers for today po?
Oh yeah, final reminders. I should be. Oh, yeah, there we go. Sorry, I should have flashed that. But I wanted to see myself on the whole screen. Kaya tinanggal ko ang aking PowerPoint. Anyway, so these are the things I would like you to be reminded of. That assessment is a key component of learning because it helps students learn. When students are able to see how they are doing in a class, they're able to determine whether they or not they understand course material. So giving feedback to the students, not just at the end of the quarter or at the end of summative tests, but while they are learning, helps students realize how they can modify the way they learn and what strategies they need to take on to understand the lesson. Next, assessment can also help to motivate students. Pag nakikita ng bata that they are progressing well, they're doing well, and the teacher is guiding them to succeed, then they will definitely um, think of reading more of the modules, waiting for the teacher to go online for online teaching. All of this show that students are motivated to learn more. Also, assessment results provide educators a data-based feedback on how effective their instructional plan is and baseline on how to proceed with the other lessons. So, titingnan po natin, hindi lang po ang grade ng bata sa test, kundi also on the performance. Kasi when we evaluate the performance of the teacher, it should be in a more holistic way of evaluating our teachers. Hindi lang sa test results ng mga bata, kundi sa performance ng bata, interviewing the students, and also doing classroom observation. It would be totally unfair for the teacher to be singled out, okay, as singled out in the process of identifying the breakdown of the learning of our students. Next, we have assessment results provide school administrators with database results on the quality. I think we're done with that. Okay, let me now summarize everything that we discussed, and it will be a challenge for you now. So I made an acronym about assessment, and I hope you question yourselves and ask yourselves, are we doing this as far as assessment is concerned? So assessment should be looked upon and should be taken on as a challenge for all teachers and all school administrators in your schools as A, to analyze individual strengths in students, profiling. Magkaiba po ang pangailangan ng bawat bata. So kailangan po natin ma-profile ang mga bata. And that's A for assessment, analyze individual strengths and needs, diagnosis. Next, S, strategically plan for each learner to improve and excel. It's difficult, but we have to do it na dapat ang mga bata na mahihina nagugrupo sa mga lalaki. So that mga galing. So that's also strategically planning for the learner individually as well. The grouping. Hindi yung, okay, randomly choose your groups. Hindi pwede. Si teacher, okay, the following groupings have been done for you. So the following students are in group A. The following students, kasi nga, pinagsama-sama mo ang pwedeng makatulong sa bawat isa. Right? Set new objectives. When I say set new objectives would be, magkaiba po sa learning competencies yan, sa learning objectives. The learning objectives is It's providing students with statements that this is what I want to know, this is what I need to learn, okay, via strategies. Next, explore abilities. Looking at, ito yung sinasabi ko po dati po na I know that it's true that we should start with the learning styles of our students where they're from, but we need to help them explore all other learning styles via teaching strategies and learning strategies in the due course of the learning of the subject matter. Kasi hindi pwedeng isa lang po sila na ilan lang po ang style nila. They need to be able to become holistic individuals. Hence, on that note, they need also to acquire and explore all other learning styles that would help them become um, more independent and they're independent as a learner. Supply assistance and appropriate materials. I think you know that already. Next, stress raw improvement. Monitor for immediate intervention. I've been mentioning that already. Empower well with self-directed assessment strategies. Nurture and support efforts. And finally, translate needs and strengths into active learning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what assessment also is all about. And all of these statements per letter in the assessment are my challenges for you out there. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And I hope to see you next week for our next uh, series of webinars on PPST. Good afternoon.
There we have it. In behalf of VIBAL Group Incorporated, I would like to thank our speaker for today for this very eye-opening and insightful learning session. It is
Mhm.
an honor to have you with us today, brother. And to all our Kavibal viewers, all thanks to you for your continuous patronage to our daily learning session. Don't forget to register to get your e-certificate of participation. We also encourage you to subscribe and watch on our official Vival Facebook and YouTube channel. Muli, maraming salamat at magandang araw sa ating lahat.